Hello, everyone. Welcome to the channel of terror and horror. Today, we bring you a series of the creepiest and scariest stories that will send shivers down your spine. If you're a brave fan of horror content, get ready for a dark journey into the unknown, as we'll confront you with fears from your worst nightmares today. But before we embark on this chilling adventure, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to make sure you won't miss a single story. Warning, this video is so terrifying that it might keep you awake at night, so watch it at your own risk. Are you ready? Granddad is dead at the dinner table. He's been sitting there for 40 minutes, and no one else has noticed. He's still wearing the pink paper hat that came out of his Christmas cracker, and he's smiling. He's smiling at me. I was 8 years old when this happened. We've just finished Christmas dinner, and Mom is busy clearing the plates away while my dad and sister are in the lounge, arguing about what film to watch next. I'm sitting in the chair opposite the recently deceased, and I'm currently not allowed to leave the table until I've finished all of my green beans. The only thing more disgusting than a dead body, in my opinion. Mom appears from the kitchen with a steaming hot cup of tea and places it in front of her father. "There you go, Dad," she says lovingly, followed by a kiss on his wrinkled cheek. His own daughter, flesh and blood of his own loins, can't see that he's gone. Perhaps she may have noticed his unresponsiveness if he had been a man who said please and thank you every once in a while. But he never did, so the rudeness passed by without remark. I heard adults talk before about how old people become invisible, but this was the first time I had witnessed a disregard towards more senior people in real life. Before this, in my ignorant youth, I thought they meant that literally. Like, would you suddenly be imbued with the power of invisibility when you turn 60 or something? I was looking forward to it. Think of all the pranks you could play on people, the secrets you could learn, or the things you could steal. I guess even back then, I had something wrong with me because I didn't want to tell the others about Granddad, not just yet. And I didn't feel sad about it either. Why would I? Granddad was a nasty prick who never missed a chance to get a rise out of me. A gaslighter through and through. No cuddly, wise old sage to be seen here, just a bitter, black-hearted old miser. Scrooge, but without the spark of hope buried deep down within. The only thing that lay deep inside of him was rancid skunk farts strong enough to burn out a Geiger counter. He hated me, and I hated him. It was just the way it had always been. In truth, all I felt at that particular moment was excitement. I wanted to watch and wait to see who would spot Granddad first. All the while, I played a movie out in my head, exploring each possible reveal. Mom would go to pieces. She worshipped the ground that man stood on, God knows why. The hold he had over her would make most cult leaders envious. Dad was, for a man, very tearful. I could imagine him trying to keep it all together, for my mom's sake, before falling to his knees and sobbing his eyes when the penny dropped. Finally, my sister never missed a chance to be a drama queen and be sure to mourn the loss of her granddad as if he had been her best friend in the whole world. In reality, the pair barely acknowledged that one another existed. We'd have to wait and see who wins the jackpot. We're approaching an hour now. It can't be long. I want a clean plate, mister. Mom warns me on her way back to the kitchen, but I can tell from the weariness in her voice that she can't be bothered with proper discipline today. She was working on her 4th glass of wine at the end of the meal, so perhaps that dulled her senses enough not to notice the corpse sitting at her table. Anyway, she'll soon cave to my stubbornness, and then I'll wolf down 3 portions of trifle before the Queen's speech has started. You could set your watch by her lack of parental consistency. I do hope they don't notice Granddad until I've had my trifle. That would be not very pleasant. Speaking of the old devil, he looked like one of my action men. It was surprising to me just how quickly the dead turned into wax. His whole skin had drained into a creamy white mass. I see that same color every week when I walk past the cheese counter at the supermarket. I thought about taking my knife and seeing if I could quickly push it through his fingers to reveal the boneless, bloodless rubber within. Instead, I settled for jamming my fork underneath the nail of his index finger. When I first noticed he'd stopped breathing, I'd kicked him hard in the groin a few times to make sure he really was gone, but it didn't hurt to double check. The prong seeped a couple of centimeters into the fingertip, then hit the bone and stopped. "Take that, you old shit," I whispered to myself. "That's for every time you pretended you couldn't hear me and yelled, 'Speak up, boy,' right in my face, covering me in your acid spittle. For all the times you tripped me up with your cane and then laughed your rotten self silly with amusement. And for the farts, those fucking farts. You always had one on standby for me, didn't you? Ready to unleash from your ancient bowels whenever I had to pass you in the corridor. And then, to top it off, you'd blame it all on me. All my friends' granddad showered them with love and gifts, took them to the park for a kick around, taught them carpentry, or showed them how to fix cars. Christ, I would have settled for one pleasant hello from the man. How pathetic is that? Thinking about it, the first genuine smile he'd ever shown my way was the one he had plastered on his dead face right now. Everyone else in my family was either somehow blind to his arseholeness or just too scared to argue back. Any complaints I made were always written off as me being too sensitive. I twisted the fork clockwise and, in doing so, nursed his fungus-ridden nail away from its bed. The unskinned meat beneath glistened like hot lava. The rush of power I felt at that moment was incredible, but that euphoria soon evaporated when I looked back at Granddad's smiling face. Only now, he wasn't smiling. He was grinning. The old tramp only had 3 teeth left in his head, so it wasn't much of a grin, but those eroded yellow fangs were now on full display when they hadn't been moments before. In shock, I released the fork, still embedded in his nail, and sank back into my chair as far as I could. I almost forgot myself entirely and was about to scream out for my parents' help, but I managed to compress the yelps before they left my throat. Immediately, I began to rationalize. He was dead. I knew that for sure. I had waited such a long time to be sure. It must have been something I had done. I must have used too much force with the fork. Enough to knock his jaw loose and make it appear like he was grinning. That term at school, we learned about how a series of electromagnetic responses and chemical reactions control the human body. Maybe I hit a dimly functioning nerve ending, which made his mouth twitch. Or perhaps random body movements were all just part of the decomposition process? I should have paid more attention to the teacher and not spent so much time doodling skulls in the back of my science book. But these theories were overshadowed by a bigger question, one that had been playing on my mind ever since I noticed that the cantankerous shitbag had popped his clogs. What was he even smiling about? What thought could have passed through that cesspit of an organ he called a brain to induce such glee before the lights finally went out? I don't want to know if it was enough to make him smile. Maybe the bastard just wanted to give me one last scare before he left this earth? The fear left as quickly as it had arrived, and now I'm grinning back at him. Soon, I had to cover my mouth to stop the sound of my laughter, as a joke popped into my head. "Hey Granddad, maybe I should speak up, boy? Let everyone know you're worm food." But no, I won't. I'm staying stum. You can sit there and rot for a bit longer. I look back at the fork sticking out of his mutilated finger and see 3 small bloods leaking onto the tablecloth. Soon, a small stream began to stem from the finger, and I cursed myself for getting carried away in my revenge. If anyone saw the blood, The game would be up too quickly, and I'd also get done for desecrating a corpse. I had to get rid of the evidence. I checked my peripherals. Mom was still sleeping in the kitchen, and I could still hear my dad and sister's voices reverberating from the lounge. The film choice argument was still unresolved. I yanked the fork from Granddad's finger, releasing a spurt of pressure. Then I flicked the fork over and scooped the prongs underneath Granddad's veiny wrist. Using all my strength and many years of practice playing arcade claw games, I raised his hand and dragged it over to the right until it hovered directly above the still boiling hot cup of tea. Then, with all the precision of a magician's tablecloth trick, I whipped the fork out from beneath his wrist and sent his bleeding hand tumbling into the boiling bath below. My plan worked surprisingly well. His old shrunken fingers were just the right size to fill the depth of the cup without knocking the whole thing over. Only a few drops of tea shot over the rim and splashed onto the dinner table. As the steam rose from the cup, it perfumed the air with a new smell of macerated flesh, which still smelled better than green beans. I pulled the napkin out from around my neck, mopped up the rest of the spilt blood and tea from the table, and then sat back in my chair just before Mom walked back into the room. Again, she ignored her father in the slightest, caring only about the contents of my plate. I want all these greens gone in the next 5 minutes, or no trifle. With her final warning handed down, she returned to the kitchen. The sound of a cork popping off a fresh bottle of wine came not 30 seconds later. I knew I had plenty of time to eliminate these rancid vegetables. And for once, Granddad would be of some use to me. I slid off my chair, grabbed the beans from my plate, and then stuffed them into his cold mouth. They slid easily over his toothless gums. It was the easiest hole in one I've ever had. But even sitting down, he was still a lot taller than me, so I could only get them in so far. I took a moment to observe and record this image in my memory fully. He looked quite the sight. The green tendrils dangling from his mouth made it look like he had some alien creature bursting out of him. I retook my trusty fork and pushed the rest to the back of his throat until they disappeared. Then I punched his mouth shut. The force of the uppercut made his pink paper hat slide down over his eyes, and somehow, his mouth formed back into a smile. "Mom, I'm finished," I shouted with savored glee. "Okay, dear," she replied, the alcohol already breaking down her words into their bare vowels. And with that, I leave Granddad, blinded, gagged, and all alone. I cast the winning vote in the film choice, Muppets Christmas Carol, the only natural choice. The Muppet had just finished their opening musical number about Scrooge when Mom's scream sent us all jumping to our feet. My dad and sister barrel into the dining room. I follow them dutifully, trying to build up some tears to look suitably distressed. Once in the room, the three of them break into a state of panic. Soon, I join them. Granddad wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't even sitting at the table. He was on the floor, with his hands around his throat. His cheese-colored skin was now a lively reddish blue. His arms and legs jolted on the floor intermittently, like how my toys did when their batteries were running low. Mom is on her knees next to her fallen father, sobbing, trying frantically to unlock her phone screen, but her hands are shaking too much from the booze and the stress. Dad takes action immediately. He dives to the floor and starts a half-remembered, fumbled version of the Heimlich maneuver on Granddad. The older man's bones break like breadsticks. Bless Dad for trying, but the kiss of life was not. My sister navigates to the furthest corner of the dining room and starts screaming incessantly. There is no bloody help as usual. Meanwhile, I quickly move over to the pile of vomit by the side of the table that no one has noticed yet and do my best to crush any visible green beans into the carpet with my heel. My heart somersaults in my chest as I watch Dad spend 10 minutes slamming his father-in-law's body around like a piñata before he admits defeat and starts bawling like a baby. "He's gone," my father announces, with no medical authority. But it looks like he's right. Just like that, Granddad stops moving and turns back to wax. Mom still can't unlock her phone, so I take it from her limp hands and do it for her. Like all good children, I knew her passcode by heart. I'm pretending to dial 999, thanking God this is all over when something burning hot wraps around my bare ankle. I look down, and Granddad's eyes meet mine, sort of. They're full white, rolled back to oblivion. He's holding me with his right hand, the scalded one. It's littered with broken boils that open and close like 1,000 hungry mouths. Blood from his ripped-off nail runs down my foot and in between my toes. He flaps his lips, but no sound comes out. Instead, he seems to suck the sound out of the room completely. It goes so quiet as I stare into those snowstorm scares that I think I must be dead, too. Mom comes to my rescue. She pulls her father off me and blubbers some rubbish about how he needs to hold on and stay with us, but as soon as she lays him on his back, he's not breathing. Now his lungs have stopped, and mine can finally start again. That last jump scare must have finished him off. For all the man's faults, you can't say he wasn't a fighter. Without me realizing, Dad had taken the phone from my hand and had made it through to the operator. He starts a frantic rundown, but then Mom barks at him to stop. She draws Granddad's arms over his chest and then buries her face into his hands, the universally accepted grieving pose of knowing that a person's life has come to an end. Then the crying properly starts, her body bucks in great sniveling bouts. The dry hyperventilating accompanied by the shivering rush seems to shrink her body smaller and smaller. I go to place a comforting hand on her back, but before I make contact, she suddenly stops crying. Her head raises. She's looking down at Granddad's hands with a puzzled expression. She quickly turned his non-scalded hand over and removed something threaded between the withered fingers. It's small, about the size of a postage stamp, and when she spins around to show us all, the mystery behind Granddad's final smile is revealed. I instantly recognize the colorful, crumpled piece of paper, one of the joke slips that came out of our Christmas crackers. Like most people, we never bothered reading that rubbish. Their only destination is the bin, but it seems Granddad held onto his on this occasion. Mom keeps staring at it, her eyes repeatedly running over the tiny printed words. Dad asks what it says, but she ignores him and continues to burn a hole in the paper. I snake behind her and thread my arms around her neck in a caring embrace, but I want to see what it says. Bizarreness followed. Question: what did Granddad say before he kicked the bucket? Answer: how far do you think I can kick the bucket? At the time, I noted the creepy coincidence, but I was sure it was all. I didn't think the old goat had one funny bone in his decrepit body, but it fits that if anything were to amuse him, it would be gallows humor, even rubbish gallows humor. Maybe that's why they make those jokes so terrible in the first place. They're designed to make you appreciate the good jokes all the more. Just like how a horrible person can make you value and cherish the friendly people you meet, basic human conditioning. It turns out I gave myself too much credit. Granddad was never smiling at me. He was smiling at himself. Amused by his mortality, maybe even at peace with it, before he felt it slipping away from him. What else can a person do in that situation but smile? And then I went ahead and stuck green beans down his throat. Well, it was an honest mistake. I figure now is the time to release some crocodile tears and bring the curtain down on this event. Dad embraces Mom and me with his sweaty arms. Then he beckons my still screaming sister over to complete the family hug. Her irritating scream finally gives out as she waddles around and joins us. I have to admit, being buried at the center of that grieving mass, I felt an inner peace like I've never experienced before or since. Imagine finally returning to the womb. That's what it felt like. Living in that moment for only a handful of minutes completely justified the traumatic event of watching an old man choke to death in front of us. A true Christmas miracle. It's a shame that I never got my trifle. The condition that affected dear, departed granddad is called catalepsy. You would have seen it illustrated before in countless films and TV shows for dramatic effect, but I promise you, this was a rare example of its actual world application. Definition: a medical condition characterized by a trance or seizure with a loss of sensation and consciousness accompanied by body rigidity. This includes overall slower bodily functions, particularly breathing. So, it seems I jumped the gun a bit. In my defense, I was only 8 years old, and also, people rarely ever recover from catalepsy. Death isn't usually far off, so you might say I just sped up the inevitable. You're welcome, Granddad. The official cause of death was recorded as choking, followed by unsurvivable cardiac arrest. Luckily for me, the coroner attributed the injuries I inflicted upon Granddad's pelvis, finger and face to my dad's clumsy life-saving attempt. Sorry, Dad. It was all wrapped up in a neat little bow like a rubbish joke inside a Christmas cracker. Mom doesn't talk about that day. She blames herself too much. Now, you rarely see her without a drink in her hand. When she's on a real bender, those dark thoughts she harbors in the back of her mind sometimes form into words and fly from her mouth. So strange he should choke. I'm sure his plate was empty when I took it away. Why, the only food left on that table was your green beans. And then she would give me a loaded stare, just for a second, before washing away any lingering suspicions she may have about her only son with another good glug of wine. Oh, what parents won't do for their children, eh? One small tradition does live on from that eventful day. Every Christmas since we have gathered around that same table and raised a toast to Granddad's memory before tucking into our meal. No one ever wanted to sit in the chair Granddad died in, so Dad threw it away. Now this 6-seater table only has 5 chairs. I find the lack of symmetry rather disturbing but not as distressing as what happens next. Even though I did escape punishment, I have ended up paying for my sins. All I know is how good and natural it feels, be it real or purely physiological. The moment our glasses clink together, it starts. Sometimes, it's an instant thing, over and done within 5 minutes, or, in what seems to be happening more frequently, the complete torture can play out over a period of hours. "Speak up, boy," says the familiar gravelly voice that only I can hear. Then my nostrils begin to burn from the scent of a rancid fart no one else seems to notice. Finally, a red-hot tightness coils itself around the ankle, the same place where I got grabbed all those years ago, and pain starts firing up my leg. The voice continues, "I'll be here with you until you speak up, boy. You want me gone? You better tell them all what you did," Granddad instructs me. But I know better. He won't go, not even if he wrote a signed confession to the police. He's having too much fun. I can see his shadow right now, watching from the space where his chair should be. Don't ask me how I know, but I can assure you, he's still smiling. I suppose there are things I could do to stop the curse, if that's the right word for it. I could avoid the dinner altogether, try not to join in on the toast, perhaps. Or maybe spend a couple £1,000 on therapy. I worry that if I do any of those things, I think this evil might follow me elsewhere. This ritual of torture seems to suit Granddad's spirit. I believe it contains him, and that's good. I figure, just like Christmas itself, you only have to suffer through it once a year, and it's always better to be haunted in some company, I reckon. So, I do my best to stumble through the meal and attempt to make out what everyone else is saying while the voice in my head screams bloody murder. Try not to gag from the smell that makes my eyes sting. Talking when the pain allows and slowly eating what I can, but for me, that's probably the worst bit. Ever since that Christmas granddad died, I've struggled with my food. You see, now everything tastes like green beans.